This is the 2025 Chevrolet Silverado EV RST. Now for 2026, this RST trim level will no longer be available on the Silverado EV lineup. That lineup for 2026 will consist of Work Truck, LT, and Trail Boss, which kind of makes sense because this top-of-the-line RST model is only about $3,000 less than a Sierra EV Denali, which is a bit nicer of a pickup truck with mechanically identical specs underneath. So it makes sense that Chevy is kind of doing away with this high-end Silverado EV model and letting GMC take that with the Sierra EV. Well, you'll still be able to get many different Silverado EVs for 26. Now, all of GM's large electric vehicles share many components. Used to be called the Ultium platform, now it has some other name. But essentially, they are all derived from the original electric Hummer, which was the first full-size electric vehicle from General Motors, really showcasing what GM could do with an electric vehicle. And so the ethos of big and brawn are still carried over into this Silverado EV, although this is definitely a more streamlined package than the Hummer. And Chevy and GMC and General Motors have really learned a lot since the Hummer was first launched a few years ago. And so there have been incremental range improvements with every model year, with the max battery pack for 2026 now achieving 478 miles per charge. This model has an estimated range of 460 miles, a range that I have been able to exceed as I have been averaging 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour with this truck, which is better than I saw with the Rivian R1T Tri. Now, I'll talk more about that when we are driving this vehicle because the R1T Tri is a more powerful truck than this Silverado EV RST. But it's still very impressive how General Motors has been able to maximize the range out of these massive and colossal vehicles. This truck does have a curb weight of 9,000 pounds. But let's dive into this 2025 Silverado EV RST to see what this truck is all about. All right, let's go through some of the specs of this 2025 RST. 754 horsepower in wide open watts mode. Wow. 775 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 in about 4.5 seconds. This truck weighs 9,000 pounds, 460-mile range, although I have been overachieving that with my efficiencies thus far. And it's sitting right around $97,000 as spec. And that's something that does improve for the 2026 model year. You can get a Trail Boss Max Pack Silverado EV starting at $83,000. So still expensive, but definitely a bit more of a buffer than between this vehicle and the Sierra EV, which I'm happy to see. And talking about the design for a moment, I think the looks of this truck have grown on me. When I first saw it last year, I was a bit uncertain, especially about the front end. But I've been seeing these on the road now, and especially in this like bright electric blue paint, I think it kind of fits the ethos of this vehicle. And you can also get the Sierra EV, obviously, that has, I think, a bit more of a handsome design overall, although I prefer the rear end of the Silverado EV to the rear end of the Sierra EV. This just gives a little more streamlined and modern than what the Sierra looks like. But again, it's personal preference. On this Silverado EV RST, we're riding on these massive 24-inch wheels wrapped in 35-inch tires. This is the same that you're going to get on Sierra EV Denali and like Cadillac Escalade IQ. There are going to be smaller wheel sizes on offer for the work truck and the LT Silverado EV for 2026. And the Trail Boss will get 18-inch wheels, also wrapped in 35-inch tires, so just a lot more sidewall there. I just drove the Sierra EV AT4, which is the GMC version of the Chevy Trail Boss, and you know, it rides kind of as you would expect, pretty similar to this RST, except it has a 1-inch suspension lift, so it does lean even more in the corners, makes this vehicle feel a bit more spry, but these aren't very athletic vehicles, which I think contributes to my efficiency. Because I'm not a scientist, but I have had a thought, bear with me. So when you're driving a vehicle that is super tight and nimble and agile, say the Cadillac CT4V Blackwing, which I think is incredibly tuned down and amazing to drive, well, that inspires aggressive driving because the car is just confidence inspiring. It makes you feel like you can kind of take every corner and fit in every gap with ease. But when you're in a bigger vehicle that isn't very aggressive and isn't very athletic to drive, well, that doesn't inspire super fast cornering or, cutting through gaps in traffic. And so you drive a little, more conservatively and you aren't driving as aggressively. So when I compare my efficiency on this Silverado EV RST, 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour, which would give this truck a range of 470 miles because this is a 205 kilowatt hour pack, that is better than I saw in the Rivian R1T Tri-Motor. Now that Rivian R1T Tri-Motor uses about a 140 kilowatt hour pack, so much smaller than this vehicle, but it is rated to get almost 400 miles of range because it's supposed to be more efficient. However, that vehicle is far more agile than this Silverado EV. You feel this car is 9,000 pounds when you're driving. It doesn't really corner that great. It's pretty quick, but overall, this doesn't inspire you to drive aggressively, so you don't. Versus in the Rivian R1T Tri, that truck does inspire you to drive aggressively, so you do. I floored that thing all day long, where I haven't really floored this truck all that much. And I saw 2 miles per kilowatt hour on that Rivian R1T Tri, which would give it a range of about 280 miles, far less than its 400 mile figure. So in some ways, this vehicle inspires more efficient driving, which helps bolster its massive battery pack. Kind of interesting. I don't really know where I'm going with it, but that's my science for the day. Anyways, back to normal car review stuff. Sitting in the back of the Silverado EV RST, behind my ideal driving position, I can't even reach the seat in front of me. There is so much space back here, plenty of knee room. Although thigh support isn't great because the floor is high, because that is where the 205 kilowatt hours of battery is right beneath us. But since I can extend my legs so far forward, well, then I do have thigh support. Sitting upright, my head does clear. I'm 6'2", sitting behind my ideal driving position. We do have a fixed glass roof, but that doesn't really impact headroom at all. There's no shade, which is a bit of a bummer. I think the Sierra EV does have a shade, which is nice to see. I like shades. I don't really care for fixed glass roofs. I always have the shade closed if there is one. But it's not too big of a deal. Folding down the center armrest, we find a pair of cup holders. We have heated outboard seats back here, 2 USB-C charging outlets, one 10-volt outlet or 120-volt outlet, air vents, map pockets, and yeah, it's a very spacious back seat, a little bare bones, but you would get more features than something like the Sierra EV Denali. Climbing up front in the 2025 Silverado EV RST, I have to say I actually prefer this spec to the one I drove about a year ago on the launch drive for this truck. This has contrast white on the upper dash and on the seats and on the door panels and down low, and that definitely helps bring some energy into this cabin. I think the ones we drove last year were just all black and it was a little drab. This is definitely a little more interesting. I prefer it. And other than that, it is standard Chevy stuff. We have this 17.7-inch infotainment system, 11-inch instrument cluster, virtual rear view mirror, wireless charging pad, 2 USB-C charging outlets, cup holders, a pretty big center console with another USB, and then Chevy's typical steering wheel, column-mounted gear selector. We also have Super Cruise, which is awesome. Love Super Cruise. And Super Cruise is actually getting an update for 2026, so that might be another reason you want to wait a model year. Those trucks are already starting to arrive, the 2026 model year trucks. The two updates are the trucks now have, and the vehicles with Super Cruise now have lane centering outside of Super Cruise, which was always a bit odd that they never had that before. So basically now, if Super Cruise cuts out, all you have to do is put your hands back on the steering wheel and the truck will maintain lane centering. Before, like in this vehicle, if Super Cruise were to cut out, it can sometimes be a dramatic affair because you gotta quick grab the steering wheel before the truck veers out of its lane. It won't lane center outside of Super Cruise. This basically allows you to maintain the same level of awareness, not like as focused as if you were actually driving, just kind of paying attention, but you just have to put your hands on the steering wheel or take them off when Super Cruise resumes. So I like to see that. Also, it has a feature kind of like Navigate on autopilot from Tesla, where as you approach your exit in the Google, if you're using the navigation and the Google system in the infotainment system, the truck will automatically start to move you over to the right side of the freeway if it had previously moved you left, because this has automatic lane change where the truck just decides based on how traffic is flowing what lane you should be in, and it will put you to where you're right next to the exit by the time you get to your exit. It won't put you in the exit lane, but it will put you right next to it, which is pretty impressive. So those are definitely good updates to Super Cruise. I like that. I also like that we have physical climate controls on this interior. The one thing that this car doesn't have is Apple CarPlay, which is just kind of upsetting. None of GM's EVs have CarPlay. They do that for data collection. But the biggest bummer about it is I was driving behind a Buick Envista on my way over to film right now, and I could see through that vehicle, and that's Buick's $23,000 entry-level crossover. I could see through the back window to their CarPlay projected on that $23,000 vehicle from General Motors, but this nearly $100,000 vehicle from General Motors doesn't have CarPlay. It just makes my music playing experience, my calling experience, and obviously messaging so much inferior to if there was CarPlay. I really hope that GM does bring CarPlay back to their EVs. Eventually, I think they will, because it's in the system. It's just been turned off. This same infotainment system is in the Chevy Tahoe and the Chevy Traverse with CarPlay enabled. So it would be great to have CarPlay in these vehicles, because then they would be nearly perfect. It's my favorite new car feature, and it's a real bummer that these vehicles don't have them. But anyways, let's get this truck out on the road to see how it drives. All right, I have just entered wide open Watts mode, and the nice thing about EVs is that you don't have to mash the brake and then mash the accelerator, because you don't have to build up power, because you get instant torque right away. So I will just floor it. Yes, very, very powerful. And you might have noticed a lot of lift in the nose. I talked to GM about that. When you floor these vehicles, you get a lot of lift because there's a lot of mass that's being transferred to the back. And they said, you know, it's kind of hard to control for expansion of air suspension chambers. Like they can control the compression, so when you hit an impact and such, but the expansion is harder to control. So that's why you get so much lift. And GM says it is within a safe range by their estimates, but steering gets really light if you floor it in wide open Watts on the Silverado EV RST. I was just driving, as I mentioned, the GMC Sierra EV AT4, and that is on coil spring suspension that has much less lift in the nose than this vehicle does when you floor it. I much prefer the sensation of flooring that vehicle than this Silverado EV RST because it doesn't get as light when you floor it, and it honestly, it feels a bit worrisome how light the steering gets when you floor it in wide open Watts. So I turned off wide open Watts now. We're gonna go back to the normal driving experience of this vehicle and get it out on the road to see how it drives normally. All right, driving the Silverado EV RST in normal driving conditions. Obviously, this truck is very fast, 754 horsepower. Even when the truck weighs 9,000 pounds, is still plenty to get up to highway speeds. And then turning to comfort, I am pretty impressed how General Motors has managed this vehicle's weight, riding on 24-inch wheels. It's still a pretty comfortable ride. Like, obviously you're gonna feel bumps, you're gonna feel imperfections in the road, but overall it's pretty muted and definitely acceptable for the price of this vehicle and for what it is. This full-size pickup truck weighing 9,000 pounds, pretty good ride. I actually think the Sierra EV AT4 with the thicker sidewall tires, 18 inches on 35-inch tires versus 24 inches on 35-inch tires, and the coil spring suspension, I honestly think that rode a little smoother than this air suspension does. I found that a very comfortable vehicle. But again, this is very acceptable. You get a bit of wind noise in the Silverado EV RST. The biggest difference in terms of like physical differences between Sierra and Silverado, other than obviously the design of the interior and exterior, is that you get double laminated glass on the Sierra EV versus single laminated on the Silverado EV. So you get a bit more wind noise in this vehicle, and that is noticeable. It's a bit more hushed in the Sierra, but overall, very, very comfortable vehicle. You feel like the king of the road driving this. Like we're passing a Yukon right now, like I'd say a 2017 Yukon, and I'm like, my eye level is the top of that car. We are so tall in this Silverado EV, and part of being so big is we actually have a flat glass mirror on the right side. The right rear view mirror, the right side view mirror I should say, is flat glass, so it doesn't have the little objects in the mirror are closer than they appear script, because it is flat glass. It's not concave to give you a wider view, or convex, whichever one, and so that does lead to kind of awkward visibility on the right side of the vehicle. It's a regulation. GM has to put in this flat glass because of the weight of this vehicle. So definitely something to keep in mind when you first drive this vehicle is you're not going to have the standard view out the back of the rear 3/4 on the passenger side. I think you might be able to put a normal side view mirror in there at the dealer, because it's pretty annoying and it does lead to worsened visibility. But luckily we do have this digital rear view mirror, which does help give you a wide view out the back. Overall visibility is pretty good on this truck, happy to report. And yeah, I really like the driving characteristics of this vehicle. It's super big, super massive. You feel, again, like the king of the road. And we do have rear wheel steering, pretty aggressive rear wheel steering. So at speed, it will turn in the same direction as the front wheels to increase stability. And when you're going at low speeds, it will turn in the opposite direction to decrease the turning circle of this vehicle. It's got a pretty tight turning circle. Another thing I really like about the Silverado EV RST and all of GM's large electric vehicles is how aggressive the one pedal driving can be. I think on the Escalade IQ Drive, they said it goes up to 0.4 Gs when you use the paddle on the left side of the steering wheel. They also have adjustable one pedal driving modes. So from off, standard, and then high. I keep it on high, and I think it really does contribute to the efficiency of this vehicle, because you know, you can recuperate so much energy. When I'm slowing down, sometimes I see nearly 100 kilowatts charging back into the vehicle. That's fast charging speeds basically, just from slowing this 9,000 pound vehicle down. So I really do like to see that. And my efficiency has gone down slightly from that acceleration run. I'm now at 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour, but I've put 95 miles on this truck and I'm at 76% charge. And this was not dropped off with 100%. It was dropped off with like 95%. So that's just so impressive how much range you can eke out of this truck if you try. And again, a lot of EV range is how you drive. And because this truck really, again, doesn't inspire that aggressive of driving characteristics, you can eke a lot out of this truck. So it's really impressive. In a couple weeks, I'm going to be with the new Escalade IQ, and I'm going to take it on a road trip up to NorCal from Los Angeles. So I want to see how far these vehicles can go on the freeway, but you know, around town. And I've done some freeway driving in this truck. I went out to Pasadena to do an IKEA run, but I want to see overall how much this truck can go on a freeway setting, because that's where EVs are the least efficient, just cruising down the freeway, not being able to take advantage of that one pedal driving. But yeah, overall, this Silverado EV RST is surprisingly efficient, very comfortable, and packed with features. Good job. So that's the 2025 Chevrolet Silverado EV RST. This is a really impressive full-size electric vehicle from General Motors. Now, were I looking at buying a full-size electric pickup truck from GM, I would definitely wait for the 2026 model year. You're only gonna have to wait a few weeks probably for your dealer to get one, because there are some improvements for those trucks. But if you want one right now, chances are the only ones on your dealer lots are these Silverado EV RSTs, and know that you will not be buying a bad truck if you get this one. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.